This morning, I am joined by Dr. Joyelle Clarke this morning, and we are going to have a very spirited conversation. We, I'm hoping it's going to be spirited. Good morning, Dr. Clarke.
Good morning.
And how are you?
I'm well. I'm well. I'm quite well, thank you.
Wonderful. Okay, so let's get into a bit of an introduction for Dr. Clarke. Dr. Clarke, this morning we're going to be speaking about climate change, the impact climate change has on the Caribbean, things that are being done here on St. Kitts and Nevis, regionally, in terms of our contributions, which have been suggested to be negligible, even though we face a huge brunt of it, with the increase in hurricane activity, weather activity, longer periods of hurricane season, worse storms, um, the warming of our sea levels, and a myriad of other problems that we face on a regular basis. But Dr. Clarke has been involved in livelihood research for over 10 years. She has led projects on livelihood transition, conducted research and developed programs in various capacities as a government official. Her key livelihood research focuses on assessing the transition of former female sugar workers to tourism and agricultural livelihoods post sugar production in St. Kitts. Um, Her livelihood projects support community based development initiatives, sustainable tourism, and environmental conservation. And she has engaged in developing and executing community-based projects in collaboration with community groups on behalf of the government of St. Kitts and Nevis. She has an extensive resume, ladies and gentlemen.
And you don't need to read anymore.
But I'm going to have Dr. Clarke start us off. So, what's happening here on the island as it relates to combating climate change as best as we could? What are our main problems and issues, and what are some of the ways we're dealing with those?
Okay, thank you. Okay, so we just get right into it. But allow me to present a little context in terms of climate change, climate justice, and environmental activism. Because what we do have in terms of who's working are a number of groups which, importantly, work on environmental issues, whether they're addressing coastal pollution, whether they are dealing with disposal, garbage disposal, or even just general environmental issues. And then there are other groups which are focusing, and activists which are focusing on climate change. And then there are a very small number of persons who have now transitioned, and this is not just in St. Kitts, but in the wider Caribbean, who have now transitioned to what's very important, and that's climate justice. And if any of us followed COP26, that's a conference of UN Conference of Parties, I mean, everybody was talking about it just 2 weeks ago.
Yep.
There was a very small sentence there, short sentence there, about the need for prioritizing funding towards climate justice. And that fundamental, and we'll get into it a little bit later with our invited guest, fundamentally speaks to ensuring that the consequences of climate change, which will be felt more intensely by women, rural persons, indigenous persons, marginalized persons, small islands like St. Kitts and Nevis, are acknowledged and appropriately dealt with. And you said it correctly that our contribution to global warming is negligible, but the consequences are very significant and severe for small islands like St. Kitts and Nevis. So what we have here is a very interesting situation where our islands need to develop, and a big part of our development is predicated on tourism. And the tourism industry is directly linked to using coastal resources, marine resources, even some forest resources. And how do we maintain economic development in St. Kitts and Nevis, work and use our fragile ecosystems, but maintain that balance where we do not continuously degrade the very environment that our economy is based on. And that's a consideration here today. And finally, who is doing anything about it? Who is speaking up about it? Who is concerned about situations or project developments or coastal developments where it seems as if not enough consideration is given to our fragile ecosystem, maintaining biodiversity, or simply ensuring that our island, the development is climate resilient, climate smart, and that there's enough finance to support the protection of the environment.
And I think that was one of the biggest issues out of COP26, providing appropriate financing, because although they promised, I think it was $100 million or $100 billion towards the climate fight, based on experts, they were saying that is not enough, nowhere near enough.
Indeed. And our guests will tell you that as much as they say this billions of dollars is available for climate financing, sometimes it's so difficult to access the funding, the accreditation that you need to get through the project writing, the grant writing that needs to happen to ensure that you get the funding for climate change projects and climate justice projects. So where do we go from here? That's a question. That's a question you should ask me.
Exactly. Where do we go from here?
Where do we go from here?
What can we do?
No. And there's so much that we can do. There's so much that we can do. The opportunities are endless. I believe particularly in youth activism for climate change and climate justice. I believe in civic responsibility, in partnerships, and ensuring that both government and non-governmental organizations work together to move towards creating a St. Kitts and Nevis that's climate resilient and climate smart. And a St. Kitts and Nevis where young persons as young as 5 understand that every plastic that you use, it doesn't just go in the garbage, it goes somewhere and it affects the environment. And that's why I'm very proud to be able to sit here this morning, and this is where I come in immediately and say I'm going to spend some time speaking about the groups that I've been working with and the institutions that have been the advocates for climate change.
Absolutely. So what are those groups? I'd love to know what those, because that was a question that was on my mind. We talk a big game a lot of the times when it comes to climate action, and we go to these large conferences and we say that the bigger countries need to do more. But what are we doing? Well, this is a broader question, but what are we doing collectively within the region to help ourselves and to have more of an impact on the international stage? And what are we doing locally? Where do people who are interested in environmental conservation and that frame of mind, where do they go to participate in activities to help, to advocate, to practice?
Right. So where do you go? So let's start with the schools. At the Kevon High School in particular, and I think by now everybody knows, wherever I go, I'm like, at the Kevon High School, not just because I'm there, but because I believe strongly in the program at the Kevon High School. It has committed, first under the support of our previous principal, Mr. Francis Morrison, and Deputy Princess Margaret Hutchinson, and our current principal, Miss Andrea James, to become a green school. Our color is green, but importantly, the school recognized the importance of transitioning to a greener landscape, a greener approach to education, a student-friendly space. And we got support, financial support, and this is critical because you can't do anything when it comes to activism and youth engagement and youth responsibility on climate change without funding. And this is where the UN Jeff Small Grants program, which is the national coordinator for this program, is Miss Ayesha Watts, and she's just up the road there on West Independence Square Street. That institution provided the funding for Kevon High School to be able to engage in a 3-year-long project of essentially climate change advocacy, climate responsibility, and environmental activism. The students for the past 3.5 years have been engaged in, let's call training. So we have experts coming to the school, they talk about the program, then we have them going out and doing real stuff. So this isn't just like sit down in a classroom and like, oh yeah, okay, so that's climate change. No, it's actually going into the field, figuring it out, and finding responses to the problems that we were having at the school, and also raising funds. So it's important that I pause here to say that there are many groups, and the Jeff Small Grants program doesn't just fund, well-established groups. When CHS Environmental Club, when it came out of the students, the geography class about 4 years ago, they didn't have a structure, but they wanted the support. And Jeff provided the funding for capacity development, and they provided support for groups to move from an idea to a constitution to actually effecting work and doing stuff. And so this is like a call of action to tell church groups, sports groups, educational groups, just reach out to the Jeff Small Grants program. Speak, have a conversation with Ayesha Watts. Ensure that your project is about, something that addresses biodiversity, food security, climate change, and she will get you on the right path to getting funding, critical funding, through the Small Grants program to ensure that you can be part of the response mechanism for addressing climate change. So that's one. And I want to go back to the Kevon High School Environmental Club and the fact that the entire school, every single teacher, every single student came on board with supporting that transition to being a green school. And so much so that even now, as the school is celebrating its 50th anniversary, it has something called a Project 50. And almost every project is about being climate resilient, about responding to the potential threat of a hurricane and how it would affect students, about transitioning to digital learning so that students don't have to rely on handouts and printed paper to learn. So they're recognizing that every single part of their educational journey is linked to climate responsibility. So there are spaces that people can go.
And I think that one of the problems or one of the issues as it relates to that, which is why I asked the question, because there's a lack of visibility for groups that are engaged in these actions. You might hear a whisper here or there about one or two, but we have absolutely no idea how many groups are actually engaged in such activities. And not only that, finding the financing. I'm sure no one knew about the financing options just up the road at the Independence Square. I'm sure no one knew that existed.
It's there. It's there. And I mean, I expect that tomorrow, if people listen to this program, they're going to be, how do we access up to, not necessarily that you will get, but up to $50,000 in grant funding for projects. And next week, the Small Grants program will be launching what we call Phase 7, operational Phase 7, which means we've been here for about 7 different years. I've been working with them for 7 years now. You transition to newer persons who are working in the environment. So we are here 7 years, and we need groups to get access to this type of funding to be active, to be part of the advocacy, and to be part of the change makers for climate change. There are other regional groups. So this is important because there's CYE and Caribbean Youth Environment Network, and a number of students who were part of the CHS Environmental Club transitioned to Caribbean Youth Environment Network, and the advocacy continues. So what you can do locally in Kevon High School, and then you get nationally in a club, and then you reach regionally, that's critically important. When we invite our guest in 5 minutes, she's going to tell us about a landscape mapping that we are currently engaged in across the Caribbean. This is essentially pointing out every single activist, every single group across the Caribbean that's working at the intersection of what we call climate justice and feminism. It's important that I mention it here because we often tend to dissociate the impacts of climate change on women and how it affects women. And that's the next important segment, that we have to acknowledge that some of the consequences and ramifications of climate change will be felt more acutely by women, just because of some of the disadvantages, the experiences that women have, the responsibilities that we have, not just in the home, maybe on the farm, taking care of children, etc. So that's another segment. But I think it's important that people in St. Kitts and Nevis understand that this action for climate change isn't just a few activists here and there. There are persons and groups, and there is money and opportunity to actually make a difference.
And I think that's an interesting discussion that we'll have about that intersectionality, because I don't think many people actually think about that.
Right.
It's not on their brains. It's not something that they immediately go to. So I am looking forward to that discussion. But just before we move to that discussion, we were talking about the finance, what children are doing here locally, what finances might be available, and just looking. But what about the legislative backdrop, the legislative support to help these endeavors further?
Right, that's a critical question, and it also is part of the fact that as a climate change activist, as somebody who is pro environment, pro gender rights and equality, I also recognize that another hat that I wear is being an opposition senator and being part of the legislative framework that will support bills or constitutional amendments which speak more directly to protecting the environment. So bills do exist. We have the NCEPA bill, which will have its first and second reading shortly. It was presented and then withdrawn. It will be back again. And it's going through rounds of consultation, which requires every single sector, every single civil, every single private sector, institution, NGO, every activist to comment on and ensure that when a bill, National Conservation Environmental Protection Act, is passed, it addresses every critical environmental and climate change issue facing the Federation. And this could be as critical as the grey water problem that we have on College Street got. We just drive over it and we don't acknowledge it, some of us. But it is problematic. For some people, it's only problematic when you see what's piled up at the end of the Bay Road under the bridge. For some people, that's it. Or how do we comment effectively on coastal construction, hotel construction? So we see it happening. For some, this is a problem. Is this safe? Are we considering the ecosystem here? Are we considering the impact this will have on marine life? And then it's just a fleeting thought and we move on. But then there are some serious environmental activists who, in our circle, we say we need to do something about this. But it takes more than just 10 activists to say this is a problem. We now need people in St. Kitts and Nevis to say, yeah, we're on board with this, because we understand that, yeah, we need a hotel, but we also need environmental protection.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. But before we continue the discussion and before we bring our next guest on, we're going to take a quick break to hear from our sponsors. Stay tuned.
Decided what to eat yet, hon?
Yep, almost.
If only this was easy like when we switched to Flow.
Best decision ever. Combining our mobile with Flow Internet
Saving hundreds each month on our mobile.
and getting double data to share for up to 4 lines. My ideas are the best.
Any idea when you'll make this decision?
Yeah, soon. Switch to Flow Postpaid and sign up for internet for big mobile savings and double data as low as $80 per line. Visit discoverflow.co for details. Conditions apply.
With 20% off in-store this Friday the 26th and Saturday the 27th of November at the TDC Home and Building Depots.
Terms and conditions apply. See stores for details.
Buster, roll it up, meet the thirst quencher in my cup. If you have one, hold it up and say, Buster for the colors in my life. Refreshing and nice, and I drink that what we like. Buster, you're full of vibes, living for the color. I know black and white, we do what we like. We live to enjoy life. Buster, pour it up, different flavor. Load it up. If you have one, hold it up and say, Buster for the colors in my life.
Okay, good morning. Sorry, I'm rushing time along. Forgive me. Good morning and welcome back to Voices here on WINNFM 98.9. I'm here with Dr. Joyelle Clarke, a very, very, very powerful activist, I think, in my opinion, because she's helping the youth activists for anyone that is encouraging the youth to engage in environmental sustainability is a powerful individual, in my opinion. That's just my opinion. But
Thank
yes,
you.
You're welcome. You're very welcome.
And always pretext that by saying that the power comes from, I just have to say it again.
Yes.
The funding that's available from institutions like the Jeff Small Grants Program. Please, people, go up the road by Ayesha Watts and get some money, because I could talk for a year if I don't have people who want to back the activism. We won't get anywhere. So just had to say that.
So remember the name, Ayesha Watts.
Opposite Life Fitness Center in Bird Rock. Opposite Life Fitness Center in
Bird Rock.
Bird Rock. Life Fitness Center, that's Seymour Gym. Yeah, just opposite there. That's where you're going to find the office.
Mm-hmm.
Go knock, go and say, I listened to Voices on WINNFM, and I now know I can access funding for my group. And that's important, especially for biodiversity.
Absolutely. And we are just about to log in our second guest for this afternoon. But before she comes, let me just say a little bit about her as she's logging in via Zoom. Our second guest is Ayesha Constable. I hope I'm calling her name correctly. Ayesha Constable. And she has paired her activism with her scholarship, having researched and published on gender and climate change as part of her doctoral studies. She links interests in agriculture and climate adaptation to two very important topics, subjects that we in the Caribbean need to pay very much attention to. She has researched extensively on youth and gender in climate change, which is going to be the main topic of discussion for this half hour as she joins us. Her recent academic research has examined feminist activism with the application of an intersectional lens to examine the role of young women and girls in climate action in the Caribbean. And she has been a part of several regional and global networks, youth regional and global networks. Some include the Caribbean Youth Environment Network and the Commonwealth Youth Climate Network. And she currently serves as coordinator for the development of National Adaptation Plan, NAP, for Antigua and Barbuda. So
You see why she had to come on the show?
yes,
Okay.
I absolutely see why she had to come. And I think she's joining us right now. Good morning, Ayesha. Can you hear me? Well, it seems we're having a bit of a technical difficulty a little bit. Just give us a few minutes and we'll be right back as we sort this out.
Saturday with 20% off in-store this Friday the 26th and Saturday the 27th of November at the TDC Home and Building Depots.
Terms and conditions apply. See stores for details.
When the star them there, we a top man, we take charge. Have no drink and we a shell down bars. Blast like a star with some a gal apart. Overdo it, we take it too far. Take charge, take charge.
We a hot gal, we set the trend. Magnum we drink for the top man them. Wine with the style, no stop from spend. Hot blend, back bend, and take charge, take charge.
Magnum tonic wine for the real star them. Take charge, take charge. Must be 18 or older, drink responsibly.
Apologies for the delay. We were having some technical difficulties with getting our guest on Zoom. Miss Constable, are you joined with us now? Are you here? Are you muted, Miss Constable, by any chance? Oh. Oh. Give me 1 second, please. Apologies for the delay, but we are now joined by Ayesha Constable. Good morning, Ayesha.
I've been sitting here wondering what happened.
You're on live now, Ayesha.
Oh,
Good morning, Ayesha. Can you hear me?
this one is
Okay, so you're on live now with me, Aisha, via WhatsApp. So Zoom didn't get in, but you're here and we can hear you very clearly.
Yes. So we can get into the conversation.
Right. So, just before we took the break, I mentioned that an important exercise that we're now engaged in was what we call a feminist landscape mapping of climate justice activists and groups across the Caribbean, because our host asks about, identifying persons, not just nationally, but regionally, who were working on, issues of climate change and climate justice. So I mentioned that, and I said, I decided, well, you're going to deal with that when you join us because you're the expert in that area. And also provided some context, contextualize that statement by saying that we often overlook the implications of climate change on women and the gender issues that are linked to climate change and the need for funding in that area in particular, because people just don't see that there is an obvious link between how the climate is changing, the impacts that we're going to have, and how women in particular are affected. So we could start there if you want, Ayesha.
Sure. Where exactly are we starting?
So one, you could start with the mapping. You could start with, the link between women and climate justice, climate change, and the need for funding actions in that area, and the mapping exercise that we have done. And I also start there, and then we'll get into some activism with Girls Care.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for having me, and I think it's commendable that this conversation is being had. It's not one that a lot of persons think is very necessary, primarily because it's not something that, is I don't want to use the word sexy, but trendy, that people are not necessarily keyed into this issue because it's not a everyday survival issue. At least people don't perceive it that way, when the reality is that it very much is. I think the last 2 weeks or 2 weeks ago or so, the world, or more of the world, I should say, was focused on the COP26 negotiations that were happening in Glasgow. And maybe more than ever, people were, asking about this climate change thing, this negotiation process and what it meant for them. Mia Mottley, with her very impassioned speech, I also think brought a lot of other persons' attention to the issue. The reality is that, and I suppose that this is something that you would have said earlier in the program, that the climate is changing, global climate is changing, and it has significant implications for small island developing states, like ours in the Caribbean, and for very obvious reasons. What is less readily understood is what it means for okay, so should I stay on Zoom?
You could make the switch. Oh, we seem to have lost her again.
Right. So we'll get her back and continue the conversation. And I like that she's right back. So I like that she brought up Mia Mottley, because that was the speech and the conversation that got everyone buzzing. Hi, Ayesha.
Because it was a very impassioned speech.
It was.
Okay, so we're staying on WhatsApp.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Let me try to get back to where I stopped. What is less readily understood? Right, so we understand a lot of us now understand the big picture scenario of climate change, flooding, sea level rise, higher temperatures. And again, if you speak to persons who are involved in sectors or industries that we call are on the front lines of climate change, there's an even greater awareness. What is less readily understood is the disparity in the extent to which climate change will affect different groups of people. And so, nowadays when we talk about climate change, we talk about climate justice for that very reason. We understand now that climate change is not gender neutral. Climate change is not poor people neutral. Climate change is not disabilities neutral. It will have worse impacts on those persons who have less resources to respond to the impacts.
Indeed.
And I like nowadays to make the analogy between climate change and COVID. The pandemic kicked off, and people had this flawed concept or notion that it was this great equalizer. It was now leveling the playing field. Everybody would be affected by COVID in the same way. Rich and poor would die. Men and women would be affected. And that has been the furthest thing from the truth. We've seen that poorer countries have been worse affected. We've seen that women on the front lines working in the healthcare sector have been worse impacted. And, as it is, people with less resources, less access to sanitation, less access to, protective equipment have been worse affected. And similarly, climate change is making that distinction between the haves and the have-nots. In the world and how societies are structured, one of the very obvious dichotomies is between male and female. One of the most obvious classifications of people in any society. And the issues that we as feminist activists and feminist scholars contend with are around the ways in which women are disadvantaged in our societies because of historical antecedents, because of current economic factors, because of politics, because of social, conditioning and culture and ideas and perceptions of, what women should or shouldn't do, what women should have access to, what women can and can't do. And in many societies, the advantages are in the favor of men. It's a blanket statement that I will make, but I will qualify that a little bit to say that there are ways and sectors where women tend to have a little bit of an edge, but I think it's important that we remember that that edge does not negate the bigger issues, the bigger disparities between men and women, males and females. So in climate context, we talk about the ways in which women are impacted because of the cost of climate change adaptation and because of the lesser income that women have. We talk about the added strain that women have to provide for larger families because women tend to be single mothers of larger households, households that have higher levels of poverty. We talk about even women's ability to swim or to climb trees to escape certain disasters and impacts, and in those ways, we make an argument for the need for a feminist approach and a gender analysis to climate change and climate impacts and climate funding to allow for us to address the comparative advantages and disadvantages between men and women. And again, if we break it down a little bit further and we look at sectors like farming and fishing, where women have less resources, women, have less ownership, less collateral.
More dependent.
We are forced to address in those sectors as well what the disparities mean for women and the disadvantages they're at.
How do you address those disparities?
No, it was good, Ayesha. It was good.
No, I was wondering how do you address such disparities?
I don't know if you want me to say anything else based on
So
the
the
question that
question
you'd
was, he asked, how do we address those disparities that you just mentioned?
Okay. Addressing those disparities mean, okay, so people think that addressing the disparities are simply, or addressing it is simply about, giving more money to women or getting some women into some positions to make decisions about where funding goes or where resources go. But addressing the issues in a meaningful, substantive way means righting the historic wrongs, means addressing the structural and institutional and legislative barriers that put women at a disadvantage, right? Mm-hmm. So the short-term fix is to, look at funding streams, for instance, and ensure that, organizations or institutions that are women-headed that support women get the relevant support to ensure that women are in positions of decision-making, to allow for that funding to be appropriately allocated, to look at the ways in which women and men are affected and address those issues. But those are short-term fixes, right? Mm-hmm. To fix it in a meaningful way means doing that hard work of digging through legislation, digging through policies, mm-hmm. Rewriting policies. It means addressing political processes that mean that women do not have the same opportunities in political leadership. It means, addressing cultural ideologies about the role of women and men in society, the division of labor and what women's responsibilities and rights are. It means disturbing the power dynamics in our societies, mm-hmm. so that the opportunities. What, him shaking his head? No, we're not disturbing the power dynamics.
No, he said nobody likes it. Nobody likes it, and it's something that has to be done.
Nobody likes it. People hate it, and I made the analogy again between men and women and rich countries and poor countries. When we talk about equity and equality between developed countries and developing countries, developed countries are frowning on this. Right. They don't want to make space in this little circle of power and wealth for developing countries to get a seat at the table. And it's the same thing we're talking about when we say women need equal space, equal footing, and access to, power and leadership and resources, mm-hmm. so that we can equitably transform our societies for everybody's good.
Right.
All right. Thank you so much, Ayesha. And we will definitely continue the conversation, but we will take a break for the headline news before we come back and engage more on the dynamics between gender and climate change, and more broader discussion on environmental work and sustainability in St. Kitts and Nevis, in the region, and how we can better fight or survive the implications of climate change. But stay tuned.
You found the sound. 98.9 Win FM.
We now bring you the headline news. The headline news is brought to you by Caribbean Alliance, KDP Enterprises, The Grange, and Carib Brewery.
Did you know that the Grange Healthcare Facility is the first purpose-built, non-governmental healthcare organization on St. Kitts? It's situated at Otley's, 7 miles east of Basseterre in beautifully landscaped surroundings. The Grange has a team of highly trained professionals and provides care that's rated as being comparable with UK and North American standards. The Grange offers varied accommodations to suit your individual needs, and our all-inclusive packages make the cost of care per hour the most competitive on the island. Services include convalescent care for all ages, daycare facilities for older adults, rehabilitation services, and training and continuing education for healthcare providers. For more information, call 466-5525 or 465-8020. Fax 466-8221 or email thegrangehealth@gmail.com. or visit our website at www.grangehealthcarefacility.com.
Shipping your cargo shouldn't be a hassle. It can be as easy as a single call to Amerijet International, your worldwide cargo transportation solution. We provide all the services you need to ship your goods anywhere in the world, whether your shipment is fresh, frozen, large or small, alive or hazardous. You can count on Amerijet to deliver it safe and sound. Amerijet International, by land, sea or air, we get it there. For more information, visit us online at www.amerijet.com or call us at KDP Enterprises at 466-9595.
Maybe it's the way the brilliant gold liquid reflects our sunshine, or how the bright blue of its label mirrors the clear Caribbean skies overhead. Maybe it's the fresh, crisp taste of this beastly cold beer on a scorching hot day. Maybe it's even the way it brings us all together. But one thing is for sure, Carib is very much a part of who we are wherever we're from in the Caribbean. Carib. It's the way we play. Drink responsibly.
We are faced with tough decisions every day, but choosing the right home or motor insurance shouldn't be one. You need fast claim settlement from a company that's been rooted for over 31 years. And don't forget the A Excellent rating by AM Best. Make the intelligent choice. Caribbean Alliance Insurance. Reliable insurance that you can count on. Get a quote today for your home, motor, contents, and liability insurance needs, and make the intelligent choice. Caribbean Alliance. Tomorrow secured. Local agents, Dalil Walwyn & Co. Limited. Telephone 465-2631 or 469-5303 for the Nevis office.
With the WIN headline news, I am Kevon Browne. Making the headlines, more easing of restrictions on the horizon as SKN nears 80% mark. Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister says his government's compassionate offer towards former employees of regional air carrier LIAT is the last and best the staffers can hope for. Internationally, the man accused of driving his vehicle into a traditional Christmas parade near Milwaukee made his first court appearance on Tuesday since the weekend rampage and was charged with homicide as the death toll rose to 6. Now, the details. As we approach the 80% mark of the target population receiving at least one dose of the approved COVID-19 vaccine, the quarantine period for unvaccinated and partially vaccinated people could be reduced, among others, according to Prime Minister the Honorable Dr. Timothy Harris during Leadership Matters on November 24th.
If we achieve this major milestone in our vaccination coverage, we can see the following. 1. The barriers at Port Sante being removed. The barriers are erected principally to protect our citizens and residents. The high vaccination coverage will provide an immunity barrier against COVID-19 instead of the physical fencing barrier. Port Sante then will become accessible to all. Security officials will ensure compliance with mask wearing and other non-pharmaceutical measures. Restaurants, businesses, outlets, and offices must, of course, enforce the protocols. The removal of the barriers at Port Sante will allow greater business activity and wider access to goods and services to all at Port Sante. More businesses will share in the increase in commercial activity. This, of course, will lead to more job opportunities. 2. All vaccinated tourists arriving, whether by cruise or air, can then have access to COVID-19 approved sites like Brimstone Hill, Caribel Batik, Black Rocks, to name a few. Entertainers will be able to undertake mass events for fully vaccinated persons with 75% space capacity. Fourthly, a negative PCR test will remain the standard for persons to enter the Federation, but we can see the removal of all quarantine and testing requirements for arriving passengers 12 years and over who are fully vaccinated. This will be a significant economic development as the vaccinated visitors will have the ability to integrate immediately in our community. The fifth important development is that we will be able to reduce the quarantine period for unvaccinated or partially vaccinated persons from 14 days to 9 days. This measure will assist our elderly citizens to return home, undergo a shorter quarantine period, while at the same time reduce the risk to our people.
However, although these are all welcomed easing of restrictions most can look forward to, the Chief Medical Officer, Dr. Hazel Laws, is warning that a possible fourth wave of community transmission of the virus is inevitable, with infection rates in Europe continually rising, signaling harsher restrictions, lockdowns, and vaccination mandates in some countries there. The possibility of a fourth wave is high considering the increase in inbound travelers as our restrictions are eased and the tourism industry continues to grow.
A few months ago, we determined that the critical threshold of 80% coverage rate amongst our adults would automatically trigger further relaxation of our health and travel protocols, as previously outlined by our Honorable Prime Minister. Ladies and gentlemen, we are almost there. The current situation on the ground is favorable. However, this is not the time for complacency. We are not yet out of the woods.
For November, most COVID-19 daily cases were recording single-digit numbers, and the active case count has been steadily decreasing and now stands at 30 active cases, according to Tuesday's COVID-19 report. A stark juxtaposition to the height of the third wave, where the healthcare system dealt with 61 cases recorded in a 24-hour period, managing 1,073 active cases, and recording some 10 COVID-19 fatalities in October. However, with the CMO's warning and the Delta variant yet to make its way in the Federation and the community at large, complacency could indeed bring about the fourth wave. In regional news, Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister says his government's compassionate offer towards former employees of regional air carrier LIAT is the last and best the staffers can hope for. The Virgin Islands Consortium has that report.
The offer stands as is. Take it or leave it. This is the message from Antiguan Prime Minister Kevon Browne to the trade unions representing former employees of LIAT, who thus far have been dismissive of severance payment settlement offers before them.
And again, this is a compassionate payment. We do not accept that the government of Antigua and Barbuda has any liability whatsoever to the staff of LIAT. LIAT evidently was a private limited liability company. The company doesn't have resources to make those payments. And the government has stepped in to make a compassionate payment. If you look at it as a percentage of the shares that we owned in LIAT, it was about 32 to 34%. And for anyone to ask us to go above the 50% offer on the severance, I think it would be an unreasonable request. We're trying to bring some relief to them as well by doing this sale and lease back of the assets. And it's really entirely up to them. They can walk away from the offer or they could accept it, but they really don't have any negotiating power here.
Browne's comments signal the end of his appetite for discussions on the fate of the former staffers and come following calls from Patterson Thompson, president of the Leeward Islands Airline Pilots Association, for more talks on the matter. The most recent offer on the table for the former employees came out of a November 17th meeting of Antigua and Barbuda's Cabinet of Ministers.
We would have met with the Pilots Association, and those are recommendations that came from the Pilots Association. Admittedly, they wanted us to accept the 50 or offer 50% on the full liability. However, after extensive discussions with my colleagues, even though at least a couple of us, myself and Minister Charles Max Fernandez, were trying to push to get the $120 million, that the 50% will be on the $120 million. The cabinet consensus was that it should be limited to the severance payment.
The offer from the Antiguan government is proposed to be paid out in cash, bonds, or land, or a combination of these where applicable. The offered bonds would be a 10-year government bond bearing 2% interest. Non-citizens accepting land will have the requisite license fees waived by the cabinet. Stamp duties for land transfers will also be waived as part of the deal. The Antigua and Barbuda government is also offering an alternative, a scholarship valued at the amount of severance due to the employee for any field of study at the University of the West Indies 5 Isles campus. The scholarship would also be transferable to a child or other family member upon the request of the beneficiary. To prepare to potentially make these payouts as early as the December holiday season, LIAT is entering into sale and lease back agreements with the government of Antigua and Barbuda, which covers the airline's chattel assets, except for the aircraft, which are charged to the Caribbean Development Bank. The proceeds of the sale will be used to make payments to priority creditors. Thompson has indicated the receipt of official correspondence from the cabinet on the offer. However, he criticized the letter, stating it had omitted most of the points discussed with the Prime Minister in October, and added that the association has responded to the offer but not yet accepted it. LIAPA is expected to have a general meeting with its membership this week to discuss a way forward.
We now bring you these international reports.
The man accused of driving his SUV through a parade in Wisconsin appeared in court on Tuesday, charged with homicide.
Today we learned of another death of a child related to this case. We do expect a 6th count for first-degree intentional homicide.
Prosecutors said an 8-year-old boy had died, the first death of a child in the incident that injured more than 60. Authorities said 39-year-old Daryl Brooks deliberately drove an SUV through police barricades on Sunday into Waukesha's annual Christmas parade.
2 detectives, not lay people, detectives, not only tried to stop this, but rendered an opinion that this was an intentional act. You're presumed innocent, sir, but that's what the allegations are.
The court commissioner set bail at $5 million after hearing a laundry list of Brooks' previous charges and convictions across 3 states.
He has an arrest record from 3 states,
including charges from just 3 weeks ago.
The allegations in that case, Your Honor, are that he struck the mother of his child in the face with a closed fist. Then as she was walking away from him, he intentionally ran her over with his vehicle.
Brooks had been released after posting $1,000 cash bond on November 11th. Records show he had been charged with obstructing an officer, reckless endangerment, disorderly conduct, and felony bail, jumping in a domestic abuse case. Shortly before Sunday's rampage, police said they received a domestic disturbance complaint involving Brooks and a knife.
In Ethiopia, where the conflict between the government and Tigray rebels is escalating. Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed has now left the capital, Addis Ababa, and is heading to the front line to lead his troops in battle. It comes just hours after the United Nations ordered the immediate evacuation of its international staff. The presidents of Kenya and South Africa have both called for a ceasefire. In a moment, we'll be speaking to journalist Samuel Getachew in Addis Ababa, but Victoria Gatenby begins our coverage with this report.
We are Addis soldiers.
Some of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's soldiers are now prisoners of war, and the Tigrayans have been parading them before the cameras. The presidents of Kenya and South Africa say all parties must commit to ending the violence.
We expressed our conviction that there is scope for dialogue amongst the warring parties in Ethiopia, and that there is an urgent need for all parties to the conflict to commit to an immediate, indefinite, and negotiated ceasefire and an all-inclusive political dialogue.
As the war draws closer to the Ethiopian capital, plans to defend Addis Ababa are intensifying. These women have joined a neighbourhood protection force to guard against advancing rebel forces. They've set up roadblocks, are searching vehicles for weapons, and are checking people's documents.
We women believe that random security checks on passers-by are very important. We also encourage others to do the same, because when we do this, we have no doubt that strangers will be caught.
Abiy has informed the nation that he's going to the front line where he'll personally lead the army, and he's asked Ethiopians to join him in what he calls the battle to save the nation. The US is calling the military escalation alarming and says it threatens any diplomatic progress between the government and Tigrayan forces.
Addis is under great threat, and it also means that there's likely to be considerably more suffering, and people should leave now to avoid the worst possible scenario, which could be rebel forces entering Addis, or starvation, or deprivation.
Germany and France have joined the US in urging their citizens to leave Ethiopia, while the UN says it's temporarily relocating the families of its staff. Meanwhile, more than 2 million Ethiopians have now fled their homes, with reports of human rights abuses on both sides, and 7 million people are in need of food aid. Victoria Gatenby, Al Jazeera.
Let's get the latest now from journalist Samuel Getachew, who joins us live from Addis. So, Samuel, on Tuesday, Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed had announced that he would go to the front line. What's the latest you're hearing about his movements?
Well, the head of government communications, Lagasa Tulu, has confirmed that the Prime Minister is indeed in the battleground, making sure that from their perspective that they would be in a position to defeat the TPLF that has been advancing to the capital in the last few weeks. It was also announced that the power of his office will be transferred to his deputy, Demeke Mekonnen, a longtime deputy of the Prime Minister, who really supported him when he became Prime Minister, taking his ambition aside and endorsing his candidacy and having him become Prime Minister. But this comes as this conflict is really impacting so many people, the French, the Turkish, and many countries, including the UN personnel and their dependents, have been asked to leave Ethiopia, fearing that the UN, that the conflict is coming to a home stretch and it will be affecting them in the coming very soon.
Indeed, there is growing international concern, and as you say, a number of countries now asking their citizens to leave Ethiopia. Just coming back to the president's messaging, and the fact that he's now going to the front line himself, he's clearly trying to rally support and perhaps to get Ethiopians to join in this war effort. How are they reacting to this? Will they heed his call to join the war effort?
Well, this past weekend, there were thousands and thousands of Ethiopians around the world who came out in support of the Prime Minister, saying that they don't want to be having a TPLF anywhere near Addis Ababa. He's been getting more resources from Ethiopians living abroad. And even in Addis Ababa, the famous Olympian Haile Gebrselassie is saying that he's ready to go and join the Prime Minister in this conflict. There are many young people that are signing up to see that this conflict will be won by the Ethiopian side. But again, there has been many efforts to end this conflict in a more peaceful way. The U.S. envoy was just in town trying to speak to different actors. He has said that the more the TPLF is nearing the capital, their expectation and their demands are just increasing to a point that it's becoming impossible to solve this conflict.
Yeah, it doesn't look like a negotiated settlement can be reached anytime soon. Samuel, I know it's been very difficult to get information, accurate, reliable information about what's happening on the front line, about the conflict. From what you've been observing in the past few weeks and past few months, who do you think has the upper hand right now? There's, of course, word that the TPLF are nearing Addis and so on. But do you get a sense that, they have the upper hand right now in this conflict?
Well, they've shown a very strength in the last few months, and that's why the Ethiopian side is alleging that they're being supported by either the U.S. Or even by the UN agencies. There's a mainstream accusation, not just by the government, but by many Ethiopians, that all these Western nations are in support of the TPLF. And there is a movement now saying no more of Western nations having influence in Ethiopia, because many people are insisting that this is an Ethiopian issue that should be solved by Ethiopians, something that captures the essence of the African Union legacy of African problem, African solution that has been promoted in the continent. But the Ethiopian side is also recruiting many people. There's resources that's coming from within and from outside Ethiopia by Ethiopian diasporas. So they're both getting all the support they can. But again, there's a fear. Ethiopia and the state of emergency is really having an impact on the ground. There are many people that are being detained, accused of siding or supporting directly or indirectly of the TPLF, which the Ethiopian side is insisting is a terrorist organization.
Samuel, thank you so much for that update. Samuel Getachew, Ethiopian journalist, joining us there from the capital, Addis Ababa, with the latest on the situation there.
3, 2, 1.
The DART mission could one day save the Earth. NASA will deliberately crash a spacecraft into an unsuspecting rock called Dimorphos. The aim? To find out what it would take to stop a large asteroid from one day crashing into the Earth and devastating the planet.
We're going to bump into this kind of, I call it kind of stadium-sized, like soccer stadium-sized asteroid that is in orbit around a body that is about 5 times larger. So that's what we're going to do, and then measure really the change of orbit for that secondary body.
It's the first time scientists are attempting such an experiment. And this is how they're going to do it. Dimorphos circles an asteroid called Didymos. NASA has waited for it to get close to Earth, a mere 11 million kilometres away. The spacecraft will reach speeds of more than 24,000 kilometres per hour and head straight towards it. They're hoping the crash will take both objects out of course, even if ever so slightly. And it will all be streamed via video back to Earth.
And that will tell us a lot about if we want to deviate completely a small asteroid from the Earth, what type of spacecraft, what speed, what weight, what impact we need to have to deflect an asteroid.
Scientists say the results of the experiment are vital. If an asteroid measuring just a few hundred metres collides with our planet, it could have devastating consequences.
What they're really targeting are asteroids that could be like regional destroyers, like something that could have a huge impact in, say, a certain part of the planet. So it's really important that we have a means to protect against those.
Scientists hope that this small impact will be a huge step forward to protecting a potentially devastating impact on Earth. Laura Burden-Manley, Al Jazeera.
You were listening to the WINNFM Headline News on 98.9. Our top stories were: more easing of restrictions on the horizon as SKN nears 80% mark. Antigua and Barbuda's Prime Minister says his government's compassionate offer towards former employees of regional air carrier Liat is the last and best the staffers can hope for. Internationally, the man accused of driving his vehicle into a traditional Christmas parade near Milwaukee made his first court appearance on Tuesday since the weekend rampage and was charged with homicide as the death toll rose to 6. Thank you for listening.
That was the WINNFM Headline News. The Headline News was brought to you by Caribbean Alliance, KDP Enterprises, The Grange, and Carib Brewery.
We are faced with tough decisions every day, but choosing the right home or motor insurance shouldn't be one. You need fast claim settlement from a company that's been rooted for over 31 years. And don't forget the A Excellent rating by AM Best. Make the intelligent choice. Caribbean Alliance Insurance. Reliable insurance that you can count on. Get a quote today for your home, motor, contents, and liability insurance needs. And make the intelligent choice. Caribbean Alliance. Tomorrow secured. Local agents, Dalil Walwyn & Co. Limited. Telephone 465-2631 or 469-5303 for the Nevis office.
With over a century of perfection behind the Mackeson name. A smooth blend with perfect balance and richness. It's no wonder Mackeson Triple Stout has a legacy of perfection. Enjoy the world over. Introducing our new look with the same great taste. Mackeson. All hail the king.
Please drink responsibly.
Shipping your cargo shouldn't be a hassle. It can be as easy as a single call to Amerijet International, your worldwide cargo transportation solution. We provide all the services you need to ship your goods anywhere in the world, whether your shipment is fresh, frozen, large or small, alive or hazardous. You can count on Amerijet to deliver it safe and sound. Amerijet International, by land, sea or air, we get it there. For more information, visit us online at www.amerijet.com or call us at KDP Enterprises at 466-9595.
Did you know that the Grange Healthcare Facility is the first purpose-built, non-governmental healthcare organization on St. Kitts? It's situated at Otley's, 7 miles east of Basseterre in beautifully landscaped surroundings. The Grange has a team of highly trained professionals and provides care that's rated as being comparable with UK and North American standards. The Grange offers varied accommodations to suit your individual needs, and our all-inclusive packages make the cost of care per hour the most competitive on the island. Services include convalescent care for all ages, daycare facilities for older adults, rehabilitation services, and training and continuing education for healthcare providers. For more information, call 466-5525 or 465-8020. Fax 466-8221 or email thegrangehealth@gmail.com or visit our website at www.grangehealthcarefacility.com.
WINN is 98.9. 98.9 is Win FM.
Good afternoon and welcome back to Voices here on Win FM 98.9. It's a lovely Wednesday afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us, all our listeners on radio, via Facebook, or via YouTube, or whatever means you are listening to us this afternoon. I am joined again by Dr. Joyelle Clarke and Ayesha Constable, and we're going to continue the conversation about climate change, specifically the intersectionality of climate change and gender. What word should I use there? Gender politics, gender.
Just gender.
Just gender in general.
Gender. It's just gender. Yes.
All right. So I leave it to Ayesha because I think she wanted to touch on a group. Or a cause that she's involved in. Go right ahead, Ayesha. Are you muted?
Oh, I am. Sorry. Yes.
There you go.
Thanks again for having me.
You're welcome.
Very happy to be able to share with you and your listeners. I know some of what I would have said earlier is technical, and that's really because climate change is a technical issue, but it's also, a very important social issue, a very important economic issue. And so one of the things that I want people to understand above all else is that to address climate change means relearning and unlearning some of the things that we have been taught about the environment, about men and women, about, what we can or can't do, as rights and or entitlements, and just understanding that in order to save all of us, we're going to have to make some real changes in those actions and attitudes, and the issue of men and women and that disparity that we were talking about earlier. You suggested that persons are unwilling or unlikely, rather, to be, open to the idea of handing over power to even create that equity that is needed for us to successfully navigate this. And so it occurred to me that I wanted to ask if you can think of any men in your circle, who would be open to the idea of, for example, taking a pay cut to allow for, there to be greater equity. Would they give up some of their money to ensure that women get equal salaries?
In my circle,
Yeah.
I could think about a good 3 of them, yes.
Who would?
Yeah, who would? Yeah, I could think of 3 of them
Out
who
of
would.
how many?
3 of them, let's say 6.
Okay. All right, 50%, not bad.
Yeah.
But that's one of the challenges that we have when we talk about creating that balance. It means that some people who have greater access, who have, more resources, more power, are being asked to give up something. And even with the big global issue of climate change, in terms of where the issue and the process is being more driven from, because it's really being driven by the consumption of fossil fuels by wealthier countries. And a big part of the discussion and debates is how much are they willing to give up to allow poorer countries to be able to survive this crisis. And the truth is that they're not very open to sacrificing anything, because who wants to give up, hot water and air conditioning and luxury vehicles and all of the amenities that come with a wealthier lifestyle.
Right. And I was saying, as you were speaking about that, it brought to mind the argument that was being made about fuel shortages in the UK as the winter season was coming on, because everybody wants their heaters on so that they could survive the cold. And then most recently, I think it was 50 million barrels of fuel was distributed from the reserve in America to offset some of the costs.
Especially because of Thanksgiving.
Especially because Thanksgiving and Thanksgiving and the holiday season. So although they just came off of COP26, literally just came off of COP26, crude oil fuel is still very much.
And here in St. Kitts, and I'm sure in Antigua, because you could tell us the gas prices, we feel it when we go to the pump and we're like $14 a gallon, but we don't recognize, and Ayesha, this is what's important, and you can make that link for us. We're telling people $14 per gallon now is going to be $14.50 tomorrow and $15, and there's nothing you can do about it because we don't have any reserves, but there is something else that can be done. You can't do anything about the price, but you can do something about your reliance on going to the pump. And so Ayesha, tell us, do you think people are ready in the Caribbean to say, I'll walk more, I'll bike? Our government's ready to say, let's put a bike lane in town so that let's pedestrianize some areas. Let's facilitate less driving and parking in town. And these are the connections that we may have to make so people understand that climate change affects everyone. But it's a matter of, are we ready?
Yep.
What do you think, Ayesha? I don't know.
I think there is a small subset of every population that's prepared to do that. I mean, talk about biking and walking. There's the matter of going vegan, for example, which is one action that a lot of activists are taking. Greta Thunberg, a name a lot of people are now familiar with as a young activist, is vegan for that very reason. She opts not to fly. I don't know if you remember when the COP was to have been in Chile. She was sailing to Chile because she didn't want to fly, as a way of reducing her carbon footprint. So people are making those sacrifices, and even, at a more local level, there are people who are in tune with the issue in that way and are readily making those shifts. What we are not seeing is the critical mass of people willing and ready to make that shift that is going to make this effective. Yes, every individual action counts, but in on the scale of which we need that change to happen, the numbers need to be more significant. And the reality is, if I were to be honest, because, you know, when I put on my full climate justice hat, I'm inclined to say the onus really should not be on Caribbean people and small people in small island developing states because of the negligible contribution that we make to the greenhouse gas pool in terms of emissions. The onus has to be on developed countries, wealthy countries, because of the consumption levels, because of the emission levels, to make it impactful. So that is what I really want to say, but I still believe that there are gains that we can make and will see, ways in which we'll benefit at the national level, at the subnational level, with the little changes by individuals. And so we see now where countries across the world would have submitted what we call nationally determined contributions to the climate change people, United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. So they've made these detailed documents outlining what cuts we will make in emissions in agriculture, in energy, what changes we'll make in terms of practices to adapt to climate change across industries such as tourism and agriculture and water. And these are some very ambitious targets that we're setting. For example, as relates to energy, countries such as Antigua are suggesting that we'll phase out the use of fossil fuel by 2040. And maybe if you think about it, it sounds like a little way off, but 2040 is really right here for such a significant action.
And it's ambitious.
It's very ambitious, because I was going to address the fact that they want to keep the temperature between, I think 1.5 is what they decided. And they want to have some ambitious goals where I think 60% of vehicles by 2030 are renewable vehicles and other sorts of renewable energy. And it feels a bit like the same situation with the Paris Agreement that was made years ago, where they failed to meet their quota at 2020. So who's saying that they're going to make the promises in 2030 when 2030 is just 8 years away? And I use that word very appropriately, I think, just 8 years away.
Of course. You know, so even those actions that we are putting forward, and there's some other recommendations in terms of technologies that we're going to be using that are proposed, and these are for technologies that are not yet developed. You know, so one of the things that activists were saying in the last set of negotiations last month was that you're putting forward these false solutions, these ideas that have not even yet been tested, and saying we'll solve the climate issue and the climate crisis on these solutions that we don't yet have in place. You know, but when we think about the NDCs and the targets being set for fossil fuel and shifting away from it and just transition of our economies, then as a part of this analysis, we also have to ask, who will be able to afford these technologies? Who will be able to be tap into the opportunities that are being provided under these just transition? Because the just transition means that we are transitioning away from fossil fuels, and we are doing it in an equitable and fair manner, so everybody benefits.
Exactly.
But we know how that works.
How it doesn't work.
How it doesn't work. Like, who's gonna foot the bill for infrastructure for electric cars in St. Kitts and Nevis? Who's fitting that bill?
Buy the cars, you know. And even with the transitioning that's happening, we see where it is the companies, the light and power companies in our different islands, who are themselves transitioning to take up these opportunities that are coming through this fossil fuel shift. So they are now putting in the infrastructure for battery charging plants and ports for electric vehicles. They are the ones who are just making that natural shift into this new opportunity. It's not that it's creating opportunities for, you know, small entrepreneurs to bring ideas and to make gains from this. These monopolies will continue to exist, but under this banner of the green economy, under this banner of renewable technologies. And these inputs are being provided, are being manufactured by the same people who are driving climate change. So they're coming from the north. So we are again lining the pockets of those who would have already benefited monumentally from the industrial revolution and the post-industrial activities, who are now, seeing the opportunities and cutting these paths into this so-called low carbon economy pathways.
And
So,
I think that's
people have
where
to ask these questions and look a little bit deeper into the proposals that are being made, and ask these tough questions. What is in it for me, and what is really the end goal for the stakeholders who are making these decisions.
Right. And as you talk about monopolies, and they're the ones that are taking advantage of this shift from crude oil, they're the ones that are finding the innovators and bringing them to their camp and making them their exclusive scientists or researchers or anything. So like we're the regulators who are going to determine, hey, this company has this monopoly on this new renewable technology, and so they determine the price. Where do we stand as a normal consumer in being able to afford this renewable energy and surviving?
Exactly.
Aisha,
And you're right. Some of these technologies, sorry, Joyelle, I'll come back to you, sorry.
Go ahead.
Some of these technologies could be priced a lot cheaper because, they might have been developed using less expensive inputs. But you're right. As soon as one of these, Fortune 500 or whoever they are, hear of this new inexpensive idea, they sweep them up. They reinvent and tweak and reprice, and again, it puts it out of the reach of the ordinary person. Sorry, Joy.
No, I was reminding you that we had the conversation that at COP you had twice as many lobbyists for fossil fuel industry than there were for. So they know where to go. They know how to lobby to ensure that their interests are still positioned in such a way that they benefit. So as much as we talk about let's do this, let's make changes, Ayesha, and you're both right that we really should say we don't have any changes to make because we don't contribute, but we will because we recognize that we will suffer.
Right.
But the onus really is on these richer countries to fund more, to make more changes, to make more shifts. And I want to remind you also, remember, I think I said to Ayesha, I sent her a news clip, Leonardo DiCaprio arrives at COP. And you remember your response was, and he took a private jet to get there, So in one instance, we have the activists and the global movers who will do things, but there's also the difficulty in accepting that there are luxuries that we have to give up, but not everybody's going to do the Greta Thunberg sail.
But as you spoke about that, I read an interesting article. They were breaking down the cost of COP20, and how they broke it down was how different world leaders or multiple world leaders got to COP20. And you'd think that in this COVID-19 situation where we got used to this whole social distancing situation and doing big, huge meetings virtually, where presidents and other world leaders are actually having conversations virtually, why couldn't the COP26, which is supposed to be a conference on climate action, why couldn't it be virtual to show some support in that endeavor as a fully virtual conference to show support for? Instead, all the world leaders, most of the world leaders just flew same jets that are contributing to the weakening of our ozone layer and other greenhouse effects.
And that's one of the things that a lot of activists were very disappointed about, because hosting the COP in person meant excluding a lot of vulnerable communities, a lot of groups from across the more so global south who did not have access because they did not have access to vaccines. So again, showing the connection between the pandemic, between the inequities in that regard, and climate access and climate change. So because you can't access vaccine, you cannot be a part of this conversation about your future and about the future, your country and your communities. And in that way, they felt it's described as the most inequitable, the most closed off COP that ever been, and most unjust COP ever hosted. And it's very unfortunate that with the decisions that needed to come out of this, with so much on the line with this COP, it happened to be the COP that left out most of the people who are going to be worst impacted by impacts and are being worst impacted by climate change.
Some powerful stuff there, right there. We are going to take a quick break. I notice we have another guest, and as we come back, we will have our guest introduce herself and join in the conversation as we continue to speak about climate change and what's happening locally, what's happening regionally, what can we do, and how the bigger countries can, make good on their promise, make good on the promise of 15 years ago?
20 actually.
20 years ago. All right, so let's take a break.
We're different. We're 98.9. 98.9 Win FM.
Paint it, style it, improve it. Your walls, paint it. Your rooms, style it. Your home, improve it with huge savings at the Hotsford's Building and Nevis Center's Paint It, Style It, Improve It sales event. Come to Hotsford's Building and Nevis Center now and get savings of 25% off all paints, plus deals and discounts store-wide on home improvement items.
Paint it with 25% off all paints. Style it and improve it with other deals and discounts store-wide.
It's your home, so paint it, style it, and improve it at the Hotsford's Building and Nevis Center. Paint it, style it, improve it sales event. 25% off all paints and more. Come now, save big, and simply paint it, style it, and improve it. Event starts now and ends December 31st, 2021. Terms and conditions apply. See stores for details.
I want it all.
And we're back. Welcome back to Voices here on WINNFM 98.9. I'm your host, Kevon Browne, and I am joined today by Dr. Joyelle Clarke, as well as Ayesha Constable in Antigua, and another guest who I will have introduce herself. Good afternoon and welcome.
Good afternoon. I am Telka Wallace, and I'm representing the St. Mary's Biosphere Reserve.
And what is the St. Mary's Biosphere Reserve for those of us who don't know?
The UNESCO, Man and the Biosphere, has designated the St. Mary's area from Canada down to the Grange as a biosphere reserve as part of the World Network of Biosphere, where it is a sustainable practice to live in harmony with the environment, development without doing further harm to the environment.
Okay, so it's a section of St. Kitts and Nevis that is protected.
Yes.
Not just nationally, but regionally and possibly internationally protected.
Yes.
To stop any further harm from affecting that area. And how has that project been going?
As a matter of fact, the St. Mary's Biosphere Reserve is now been there for 10 years. It was inscribed as part of the World Network of Biosphere Reserves in 2011, and it was the first of its kind in the English-speaking Caribbean. And so there have been ongoing projects and interventions. As many persons are aware, the reason why this particular area was chosen is because of the endemic species, such as the leatherback turtles that go to lay on the beaches. There are bird species that are endangered and critically endangered that go to lay on the beach as well. Then you look at the flora and the fauna, that the Biosphere Reserve have two core areas. And the core areas is a marine core zone and a terrestrial core zone. The marine core zone have the north and south reef. That is where fish go to spawn, lay eggs, whatever. And the terrestrial core zone is part of the Central National Forest Reserve. And it's all that stretch of land that goes from Canada Estate down to the Grange and all the way to the mountain top. And the reason why the area stretch out like that is because of the waterways that impact the beaches. And so in protecting all of the ecosystems, not just the ecosystems, but the community on a whole, because it has high cultural and historical value. And so this year, in November, we are celebrating 10 years of working to preserve that area. And so I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Always.
Lovely.
And climate change happened to be one of the areas that we are very passionate about, because we are disproportionately affected by climate change. Yes.
And apart from the biosphere, is there any other work that the group is doing, like possibly extending the biosphere? Is there a biosphere in Nevis?
As a matter of fact, the process of that area being named a biosphere was very long and arduous process. We had to do several consultations. We had to look at all of the species, because in order to be designated, there are certain benchmarks that you have to meet. And the community have to be on board as well. Not just that you want the area to, and the area of St. Mary's have high, very high heritage and biodiversity that really needs to be protected, and has some protection under the marine and the Central Forest Reserve. And so it was, and then the community is very much together, as you know, Green Valley. And so it was a long process, but with the entities, some entities from the government and volunteers such as myself and other volunteers, we were able to move the process. As a matter of fact, it started since around 2009 or earlier. I came on board after it had started in 2009. And so you see how long it was inscribed in 2011. So you see all of the capacity you had to build, all of the ecosystems that you had to name and document and flesh out and make an argument for. One of the things that really assisted us is the fact that there's a turtle monitoring network that have been looking after endangered species for some time. And so that turtle monitoring network looking after the leatherbacks and the green turtle and other species that are found on the beach, as well as the fact that our National Central Forest Reserve is a protected area. And so, and then you have all of the old estate buildings and the cultural heritage that is within that area. So we were able to get a positive from UNESCO in terms of naming it as a biosphere reserve.
Awesome. Ayesha, I want to come back to you. Is there any biosphere in Antigua and Barbuda or within the region that we know of?
There are projects that are similar in scope in terms of managed areas or protected areas that, there are, I would say, targeted efforts to reduce human impact, reduce deforestation in these areas, and just preserve the flora and the fauna. I want to commend this particular initiative, and just as you mentioned, some of the marine life that is being preserved or conserved under the project. I am taken back to an article that I read yesterday about climate change and marine resources, and they were reminding us that 40% of the world relies on marine ecosystems for their food, and the deleterious impacts that climate change will have on fish production, for example, will mean that 40% of the world will go hungry. There's a segment of the world population that relies solely on these marine ecosystems for food. and so that's something that we're up against. And, again, this is a small initiative, but if we were to replicate initiatives like this in several places, enough places across the world for it to be impactful,
Yep.
it can go a far way.
I agree.
Yes.
And as you were talking about the effects of marine life and the fact that 40% of the world is reliant on marine life, it brought me back to the conversation that was had, I think, a week or two ago about illegal dumping.
Oh, yes.
About illegal dumping, and the fact that people don't seem to be cognizant of the fact that, hey, when you dump this thing in the water, anywhere near the water, it'll eventually reach in the water, and it'll eventually reach in the mouths of fish. The same fish that will end up on the markets that you buy and then end up in your belly. And then you ask the questions, why am I sick?
They won't even end up on the market. They might go dead, and that's not what people are getting. And I think it's excellent that you're making that connection, because maybe if people understand, say, they might go dead for hungry at some point because of these actions or their inaction, then they respond, and better to these statements. But that is it in a nutshell. People will die because of our ignorance or reluctance to act appropriately in this context.
I think here is where I want to reaffirm the commitment, the community partnership between the UNESCO Man and Biosphere and the CHS Environmental Club, because there isn't any buy-in and there isn't any movement on the project with UNESCO if we don't have the youngest cohorts in our population. And those are the students from the Keon Primary School and the Keon High School being actively involved as ambassadors for the Man and Biosphere program. They're from the community, they learn in the community, their parents work in the community, they eat, they farm, they fish in the community. And that's why it's so excellent that the UNESCO MAB was able to, foster this partnership between the schools, so that a key aspect of it is the educational program. So students will understand, as Ayesha said, you will die of hunger, or you just die from cancer poisoning if you don't do something, right?
Because even if the fish don't die and they adapt, they get used to eating this trash, we are not going to get used to eating it. So that is where it comes back and it haunts us. And then we start to wonder, but it is our fault. And it's because we don't have regular practice. And I think you are right, Dr. Clarke, definitely, that it starts with the young people. Because if it's a conditioned, learned behavior from young, it will have an enormous impact on the future of sustainable development, environmental sustainability, etc.
As a matter of fact, right now we have a project going under the UNESCO participation program that looks at the cleanup of the Keon River, the Hermitage Estate, Keon Keys and Hermitage Bays, those areas, because of the importance of, I'm sure you heard about the Sustainable Development Goals and the fact that water courses are one of the main tenets in the 17 SDGs. And so that particular project, over the years we have been doing cleanups, we have been doing interventions, but over the past year we have taken a concerted effort since 2019, but we had to pause. All of us in the whole world had to pause because of COVID. And so we have taken a concerted effort to look more closely and monitor more closely the impacts of indiscriminate disposal. And I want to stop and mention the support of the UNESCO Secretariat. It is a small secretariat, but they do big work. I would like to commend the Secretary General, Ms. Dorothy Warner, and her staff, a small staff, for the support they have been given to the National MAP Committee in implementing this particular project. The project seeks to do the cleanup, which is in the form of physical work and education. And so we have had a workshop with truck drivers who take out people's household waste, Contec, TDC, and other community stakeholders and community leaders, and really brought them together and brought the entities like Solid Waste Management, and we want to thank them, the Marine Management Area.
Department of Marine
Yes,
Resources.
yes, and
Ms. Tricia Greer-King.
Greer-King and Ministry of Health. And we basically had persons from across the community, and as Joyelle said, persons from the schools, children from the schools, because they are the ones who are going to be most impacted, and we cannot tiptoe around it. We have to bring them in at this point so that the practice does not continue. Because when you're able to shape a mind, you're able to change the course of history.
Yeah.
And that is what this strategy is about, bringing the very young. So we had the workshop, and now we are going through a sustainable livelihood camp.
Well, before you continue, we have a caller on hold.
Yes.
Caller, you're live on Voices. You wanted to join the conversation?
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good
Good afternoon to the panel.
Good afternoon.
Yes, I recognize a voice or two, the ladies, that had something similar on Win FM, I think was on an Inside the News program, in which I weighed in on, because I'm a stickler for the environment, both land and marine based. And I want to come to, the 40% of the world population that is reliant or dependent on the marine species, fish. And there is a phenomenon that seems like it's annual. We know, we heard, we see of the seaweed, the sargassum. From gleaning from your conversation earlier and the dumping in small ways and in large ways, because we know that, industrially speaking, that can happen. What might be causing that phenomena from a marine biologist, scientific research? As you have any data as to what might have caused that phenomena? Is it a natural phenomena, or is it caused of human beings that we have seen these sargassum seaweeds that, it's our shores and, because we know that some of our fish stocks have been depleted because we, for whatever reason, the ocean floor has a life form on its own, but can be affected negatively by our behavior, human behavior. So has any data been gathered from the scientists in that field as to what caused the sargassum? That's my question.
Okay.
Okay. Aisha, you want to take it? Okay. I'll start by saying that, and this is the importance, Carla, of education at all levels. About 3 years ago, the geography students at Cairn High School decided they were just fed up with the sargassum seaweed issue. And they decided that their SBA was going to be about it. And so we called in the experts from the Department of Marine Resources, who essentially said to them, this is a fallout from the changing climate and from global warming, and we're recognizing as the climate warms, and every time it gets hotter, there's an upsurge of sargassum seaweed on our beaches. Now, I'm going to put Tricia and the DMR on the spot and say that they need to take the next environmental show here on Voices and come and speak about these issues that people are really trying to figure out what's happening. So, yes, Carla, it's a result of human behavior, because we're the ones, our actions are causing climate change, and climate change, increasing warming temperatures, is actually linked to the sargassum seaweed issue in St. Kitts and Nevis, in the entire Caribbean region. Yep. And then you're seeing the fallout in tourism activity, because people come here, sad to say, for culture, for everything, but mostly
for the beach.
So it's really affecting us. And again, it's affecting fishing livelihoods.
Exactly. Ayesha, you were going to add something?
Yeah, just to say, it is in part natural because sargassum is like,
Always
all algae that grows, and ideally would have been concentrated in maybe the southern parts of the world. What we're seeing though is a significant increase in the amount of the sargassum because of heating of the oceans, because of increased pollution, heating because of climate change, and pollution due to deforestation, for example, that's causing a lot more silt to run into our oceans, and that is a perfect breeding ground for sargassum. There's also a shift in ocean currents, which is causing it to come our direction more or in higher quantities, but generally the heat and pollution are causing us to see what they call bad bloom. So it's this just exponential increase in the amounts of it that's causing sea animals to be trapped, that's causing lower levels of oxygenification in bodies of water, so animals are dying, and it becomes a problem. It's one of those things where you say too much of one thing, good for nothing. So there was a time when in its regular quantities it was normal and healthy.
Yes.
But again, man's actions and activities and bad behaviors have led us to this point where it's having these detrimentally negative impacts on all sectors in the Caribbean and other parts of the world as well, because there's just an overwhelming amount of it.
Okay, we have another caller. Caller, good afternoon. You're live on Voices. Caller, good afternoon. Hello. Okay, we seem to have lost that caller. Caller, call back if you get the chance to. We have another caller, though. We lost that one. But, Miss Wallace, you were speaking about previously some of the activities that you were involved in.
Yes.
You could go right back ahead.
Yes, and we have been having some exciting interventions with our students as part of the Sustainable Livelihood Camp. And again, we brought in persons who are involved in the environment, and I would like to thank the Turtle Monitoring Network for helping to develop the program for the camp. And what we do, we bring them together for some theory, some fun theory, and then we take them into the field that they can see the impacts that the unmanaged, indiscriminate disposal of solid waste is causing, not just unsightly, but the effects on the waterway. And so in Keon, we took them up to a place called Tank area that they could look over and see the amount of plastic bottles that we will have to clean up. And then we took them to the beach, because when rain falls and the river goes down, then they end up on the beach.
On the beach and in the water.
Yes. What we did with the children, the first week we went to Tank, and then the second week we went to the beach. And they did, they played a game where they were given a sheet of paper with all of the things that they could find on the beach. And so whenever they find something, they would tick off on their sheet. And so we were there for about 25 minutes because it started to rain. And in that 25 minutes, we had almost 8 bags of garbage.
Most of which was plastic, I assume.
Plastic, foam, animal heads, goat heads, yeah. It was you had ropes that came in on the beach, and I have to say sometimes I wonder if the sea bring in the garbage from other places as well.
It happens.
Because
it does.
Yes, because it is impossible. Well, it's not impossible, but in some of the areas where you see the garbage, it was difficult to come from the gut, unless if it went into the sea and the current bring it down that way. But the young persons, they enjoyed the game. But then when you look on the flip side, where each item, they will ask how long this will take to decompose. And some of the items would take hundreds of years to decompose. And so therein prevented the fun, because if you have a country as small as ours and you have all of these indiscriminate disposal of all of these garbage, and 100 years time they're not going to be decomposed. 200, some of them take 500 years. And so when one of the questions we ask is, how did you feel about going on the beach and picking up these garbage? And this, because they were with their friends and they were like doing it was like a scavenger hunt. So they were running around and picking up stuff, so they were having fun. But then when they faced the reality of if this were to stay there, it would take 500 years to break down.
Yep.
And then when they realize that I won't be around for 500 years, but my descendants would be around, and based on how we are going and the small size of the country, we are literally killing ourselves.
We are.
Because there won't be any land left to farm. There won't be any land left that is untouched by our garbage.
Right.
But we can change our ways, and that is what the camp is about, bringing the reality to young persons so that they can choose a different approach to the disposal and to the use. And so,
before you continue, we have a caller.
Sure.
Caller, good afternoon. You're live on Voices.
Yes, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
It may sound a kind of way, but I'm listening to the conversation for a while. Yeah, what? I'm listening to conservation, I'm listening to water, I'm listening to everything. And the question I would ask our St. Kitts panel directly is this. Building a school on the aquifer, isn't that risking humane, what you said in your UNESCO something point, something with the water? Also, building a solar plant with the risks not knowing what the runoff would cause on the aquifer, isn't that reckless behavior by the government according to this conversation? Have a good day.
Thank you, caller, for your question. A very loaded question.
Yes. Thank you, caller.
I think I'll try the diplomatic approach to that, given the position that I'm in. Governments make decisions and they can carry them out because they're governments, they're in power. But if we all think, if 500,000 people think that this is problematic, then here comes the civic action, here comes the advocacy, here comes the petitions, here comes, we don't want this because we know that it is problematic, or we suspect that it is problematic. And that's where it is. So we call in on shows, and you know, Telka, if we were here having a political discussion, we wouldn't get 5 minutes to speak because thousands of people would call in.
This is not a sexy.
Argue.
This is not a sexy.
That's what Ayesha said. It's not sexy.
Here comes the word sexy.
Right, it's not sexy. But it's an environmental issue, and it's your life. We're basically saying, take action or we will die. And a critical part of this is for society to recognize that governments are responsible to us.
Yes.
Collective action from the community.
And that's where, so that's the response to that call, if anybody else wants to add.
Let me just also say that our governments have signed on to the Paris Pact. You heard about the Paris Pact, right? And the Paris Pact is a call to action for global approach to combat the effects of climate change in the basins of rivers, lakes, and aquifers, and to implement the management of all water resources as a matter of grave urgency. And so, in 2018, the Federation of St. Kitts and Nevis initiated the development of climate adaptation strategy, highlighting the top 5 areas, which were agriculture, water resource, human health, fisheries, coastal and marine ecosystems, and tourism as the most critical priorities for the action under the National Climate Adaptation Strategy. And the focus is first a short term. They have a short-term plan, and they have a 5-year for the different reasons.
Okay.
And the impact of COVID have made these critical areas even more urgent. And if we are telling young people that we have to change our behaviors, if we continue to go down the road that we are going, then 30, 40 years from now, we won't have...
If we have 30, 40.
We won't have it, yeah.
We won't have arable land.
We'll be underwater.
For farming. We won't have, so the question that the caller asked, he himself could have answered it, because we are saying that we are telling children, young people, take care. If you have a child that you love so much, you would do everything in your power to take special care of that child.
And it should involve...
You don't want flight to come on your child. When you have a young baby, you don't want flight. And just imagine our resources, and we don't have much. I wouldn't want... Yeah, I wouldn't want anything as a human being. I wouldn't want anything close to the apple of my eye. And water is life. And so all of us, we can't pussyfoot and all around the issue. The fact is, we are telling our young people that we want to leave a legacy for you that is healthy, an environment that is healthy. And so we put high stock on our water resource. I will leave it, yeah.
Okay. We have a caller here. Caller, good afternoon. You're live on Voices.
I'm on the line. I mean, don't. If the question or the comment is, not within, don't waste time on it. Listen, taking in mind the present situation as it is concerning littering, and not just sea, of course, but land, the whole Earth planet. Don't you all think it's time that we cease the talking and put action into this? Because we are facing, the lady say I have a minute. Am I online still though?
Yes, you're still here. Go right ahead.
Because we are dealing with a problem that have a mentality touch to it. If I decide to put a sweetie in my mouth, take it out of its package, plastic, and throw it on the ground, I first have to have it in my mind to do so, or have in my mind to put the sweetie paper in my pocket until I can dispose of it. So we are dealing with a mental problem, and we have to implement policies to deal with this thing. We cannot keep it look as though we are encouraging it. We just pussyfooting with the problem. We cannot continue doing this.
Carlo,
the nastiness is too much.
Yes.
Yeah, we do. I think it's important. Well, if he could hear us, let's just reiterate. I think this is he has given us a great segue to speak again before we close about the local, the national, and the regional action in response to climate change and climate justice. So I'll speak about Environmental Club. Telka will respond about the UNESCO Man and Biosphere Project, and the potential expansion to other high schools, and Ayesha can comment on Girls Care, which is an initiative between St. Kitts, Antigua, and Jamaica.
Yes.
So, as I said, the Just Small Grants program provided the critical funding for this club and many other clubs in St. Kitts and Nevis that wanted to work on biodiversity conservation in particular and response to climate change. They provided the funding so that we could take action, we could learn, we could be part of the mentality shift amongst the younger cohort of students. So it was important that students at Keon High School benefited from not just, the field trips and the training, but the education, the knowledge, the information that would kind of prick you and say, should I throw this here? Should I really throw my plastic bottle there? And then to greater action, which is, let's do this for our school-based assessment. Let's show CXC that we care and we can transfer knowledge from a club into our academic performance. And then naturally, we formed our partnership with the UNESCO Man in the Biosphere program.
Yes, and it is a great program. And UNESCO have been working with the communities in so many different ways, but I will just continue to focus on the Man and the Biosphere. The Man and the Biosphere came about because there are ecosystems and our people that need to be protected and nurtured. And part of that is to cease and desist from just throwing down your garbage all over the place. And if you are a truck driver and somebody give you some garbage and pay you to take it to the dump, for God's sake, take it to the dump. When I have to take garbage out of my yard, I drive with the truckman all the way to Canoe. You know what I tell him? I don't want to offend them. So I say, okay, I'm going to come with you in case it costs more than I think.
Okay.
You understand? I go to all of those lengths, and not just now, forevermore, because I do not want to go on a walk in Keon or anywhere else and see my garbage there really desecrating our environment, because it's really desecrating. And I think a lot of times it is education, because if a truckman doesn't know how much it will cost at the dump, because they don't never reach the dump. A lot of them do not reach the solid waste management site. So if you know, it just costs you $17, $20 to throw away the waste. And I would say that I want to commend the person who took the video a few weeks ago.
Yep.
And it was, St. Kitts
and the rapid response.
The rapid response. It was very quick.
I want to thank our people for really putting pressure on, and the people had to pay a fine. And so I wonder if the Ministry of Health and Solid Waste Management have made them to go back and pick back up that garbage. Because if I have a child and the child make a mess, I make the child go and I punish the child, and I make the child go and pick back up the mess and put it where it's supposed to be. So we have to do more than, as the gentleman says, we have to do more than talk. And there are laws in place that protect the environment, and the persons who are responsible for, all of us are responsible. And I would really like to thank that person who took that video and sent it viral. And more persons, all of us need to come on board, because it is our piece of the earth that will be with us for generations, and we have to take care of it. And we have to do everything in our power to make sure that all of us get the same enjoyment out of it. That is,
And these same students from the club who went on to the Man and the Biosphere program and Caribbean Youth Environment Network have now been part of Girls Care Regional, which is just a project that I just can't wait for Ayesha to talk about, because it just shows the transition.
Well, Ayesha, take the floor.
All right, thank you. And I can commend and echo all the sentiments that Ms. Wallace would have put forward, because I think that's really where the power lies in terms of people and their willingness to be a part of the process. And so we have certainly seen that amongst young people in the Caribbean. I think young people in the region and young women in particular have been very bold and unafraid and relentless in advocating for climate action. And so we wanted to support them in that effort by giving them the tools, the capacity to continue with that work. And so through Girls Care, Girls Climate Action for Resilience and Empowerment, we recruit and mentor 15 young women from across the Caribbean each year in climate advocacy and climate activism. And we do this by pairing them with mentors from across the world. Dr. Clarke is one of our mentors, and we give them the exposure and the opportunities to have these conversations with, you know, women who are doing this work and shaping the landscape, but also to actively you know, launch their own campaigns and expand on the work that they're doing within their communities, so that that work of creating the mindset change and creating the behavioral change that's so important to helping us solve not just this climate crisis, but the environmental crisis that the world finds itself in, can really begin to take shape. And, you know, we recognize the role of young women and women more generally in shaping these perceptions, in shaping behaviors, and in molding young minds. And I think if we're able to reach young people and also young women who see, you know, because women tend to have more of an affinity for this work, for whatever reason. Let's not get into the reasons. But women take that responsibility, I believe, more seriously, and maybe that's another debate we need to have. But we want to give them the tools to continue that work, because otherwise, I think we're in a race against the clock. You know, we call it now a time of code red, where the earth is really at that breaking point. And if we are not doing everything to really try and turn back the hands of the clock in some ways, then we're all really at a huge disadvantage. So that's what we're doing with Girls Care, and we continue to try and see how we can connect with other initiatives across the Caribbean and the world to build that out even further.
Yes.
All right. And before we close out, I'll have my guests, I guess they have a final point to speak about before we close out, because we are just about pushing the hour, but we'll make a leeway for us.
So Telka, go ahead. Close us out.
I just wanted to say that the UNESCO MAB will be having the final Saturday of camp on the 4th of December. And to culminate, we are having environmental awareness rally at the Maynard's Park in Kevon, and we are inviting persons to come out. We are having displays, things on display, because we're looking at sustainable livelihood, from the beekeeping, from the
STEM project in schools,
the STEM
Man
project,
and the Biosphere.
the Man and the Biosphere. We're having a lot of information and visual information that the general, bring out your child.
Come and
bring
see
your
it.
child and let them come and see a group of young persons from age 9 to 16 who have gone to this 3 week of intense training and care, because we show them care, we look after them, we appreciate them, and we don't just want to give them theory, but we want to show them love and appreciation for the fact they have taken off their Saturdays and come out. So from 4 until 6 is actually the rally, but the display will be on from 1 o'clock in the afternoon.
And
until
let's
6.
get the location again so that people know.
Maynard's Park in Kevon.
Maynard's Park in Kevon.
Yes, just a little above the police station. You would see it there on the right. And we're looking forward to having a lot of young persons.
And Win FM.
Yes. Come
I
out.
love that you called me
and
out.
Support, and support this effort to save our environment. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for joining me this afternoon on this robust conversation. There's so much more that we wished we could have spoken about. One of the touchy topics I wanted to touch on was single-use plastics. It's one of my favorite things to talk about, single-use plastics and
Then you
why.
have to get the Department of Environment here, because they're pushing that project in particular,
Right.
in solid ways.
Yes, and we are going to
marine resources.
We want the biosphere area to be the first area that's plastic
free of plastic.
Free of plastic.
And the Ministry of Tourism. So many stakeholders.
So many
because they had
stakeholders.
their we can drive through.
Yes.
So many stakeholders
Yes.
who are on this movement
And
for
the tourism is on the map as well, so we get the full support.
Absolutely. So we are definitely going to continue the conversation as it relates to climate change, sustainability with our environment, and moving forward in the future in an action-based way where we can actively affect the environment in a positive way. But thank you so much for joining us this afternoon on Voices here on WINNFM 98.9. Stay tuned for your regular programming.
Different. We're 98.9. 98.9. Win FM.
Currently, there are rumors and falsified reports circulating on social media about the novel